Jenifer Trachtman. I am the campaign manager for the Monell Anosmia project. Thank you all for being here. There are over 250 people registered for today's panel discussion, so we are really, really delighted to have you all with us and very excited to bring you this program. So the Monell Anosmia project started several years ago. It is funded in part by a federal grant, but mostly by individuals just like many of you on the line today. Thank you for that. The very first individual to get us started down this path invested in Monell. At the very beginning, his name is John Hickey, and when he made his commitment to us, he asked that we not only use it for research, but that we also use it to build awareness. As the years went on, we came to very much appreciate that. We have found that our work, our research is fueled not only by your contributions, which it very much is, but also by your personal stories, by your support of one another, and by your ability to use your voices to raise awareness and to advocate for more anosmia research. So in late 2018, we co-hosted a conference to which all of you were invited to help inform the creation of a white paper about the future of anosmia research. You're going to hear more about the white paper later today, but one of the findings of the paper is that we needed to do even more to raise awareness about smell loss. So we're here today not just to continue that conversation, but to help change the conversation. And so what we've brought you today are experts and tools to help you develop your voices as researchers, as patients, as clinicians, and yes, even as the general public about smell loss. So it is important to note that the panel today was designed before the pandemic. Of course, in the last few weeks, we feel even more urgent about the mission today because the world at large is becoming much more acquainted with smell loss as it appears to be a symptom of COVID-19, and you'll hear more about that later today. So I want to introduce Katie Boateng. She's our moderator today. Katie and I got to know each other in late 2018. She very quickly became part of an inner circle of people I call on regularly to advise me about all things anosmia. You know who you are out there. I think you're all on the line today. Katie is an associate director of undergraduate admissions at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And she's going to tell you about why she is here with us today. Thanks, Katie.
Hi, Jenifer. Thank you for the introduction. So for a little bit about me, my name is Katie, as Jenifer said. I have post-viral anosmia, and I've been anosmic since late 2009 or early 2010. And the best guess is a post-viral upper respiratory infection that caused it. So I was in college at the time, and I had never heard of the word anosmia before. And it actually took me quite a while before I ever heard the word anosmia for the first time from a family practitioner. I'm originally from Southern Idaho, and I moved to New Jersey with my husband in the summer of 2018. So when we moved to New Jersey, I had the opportunity to get to travel around the East Coast for the first time, and I was able to attend the Identifying Treatments for Taste and Smell Disorders conference in November 2018, where I got to meet Jenifer and others from the Monell Center. So during that summer of 2018, after we moved to New Jersey, I was looking for a new job, and I had a little bit of extra time on my hands. And at that point, I decided to start the Smell podcast to showcase stories from people like myself who have anosmia and other smell disorders. I started the podcast because I like listening to podcasts myself, and I also wanted to create a resource for people who are like me. When I first became anosmic, a resource like the Smell podcast would have provided me with a lot of comfort and support. And currently, hold on one moment. I actually want to put up a slide that I forgot to add, so let me do that really quickly. Okay, there we go. So currently, I am a member of the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research, their patient advocacy committee, a new member, and a PCORI ambassador. You'll get to hear about both of these organizations in more detail today. My newest venture is the creation of the first USA-based anosmia patient association. I'm in the initial stages of creating this association. And whenever I'm looking into starting something new for the anosmia community that doesn't currently exist, I always ask myself, why not me? So I actually want to get us started by introducing our first panelist for the day. Our first panelist is Dr. Edmund Pribitkin. He is an ENT-otolaryngologist in Philadelphia and Chief Medical Officer of Thomas Jefferson University Hospitals. He received his medical degree from Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Pribitkin is a longtime collaborator with the Monell Center. So welcome, Dr. Pribitkin.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's really a wonderful privilege to be here and to speak with all of you. The truth is that smell research and clinical smell work has long been a passion of mine. I've been in practice for almost 30 years, and during that period of time have been very fortunate to work with the Monell Center to really explore the first prevalence of smell loss and the loss of flavor, and then actually to look at the causes of the smell loss. Today I'll be sharing my screen a little bit and trying to address some of the things that patients come to us for regarding smell loss. So let's see if we can do that. So I think one of the things that's absolutely critical is understanding that anosmia is not something that many folks are aware of. And so the work that's done by individuals such as Katie and individuals such as Chris Kelly really bring this to the forefront. We've gotten a little bit of press recently because of COVID, because it is seemingly associated with smell loss. And one of you have already asked a question about whether or not COVID could be a cause for your loss of sense of smell. And it does appear that there's a correlation between someone who has a COVID infection and subsequently has a loss of sense of smell. Anecdotally, in the cases that I've explored, almost everybody recovers at least a large part of that loss of sense of smell. But of course, we don't have deep data because we don't have the opportunity yet to be able to look at that very carefully. We'll be able to talk a little bit more about that, a little bit later in my presentation. In terms of the reasons why people come to see us at Monell and at Jefferson for taste and smell difficulties, really, folks, one of the more common things is they ask, how can I lose both my sense of smell and my sense of taste at the same time? And this results from a confusion between taste, which is salt, sour, bitter, sweet, and umami, and really the sense of flavor. When we have a cold, when our nose is blocked up, we really don't taste or we don't sense flavors well, but really it's that sense of smell that informs flavor for us. So a lot of folks that lose their sense of smell will naturally not be able to really appreciate flavors in foods. That's one of the real challenges that we face when we have a loss of smell. People ask, what's the cause of my smell and taste problem? And people, of course, ask, am I likely to recover? The one area that folks sometimes move away from is asking how they can cope with the loss, because truthfully, what they really would like to know is, what can you as a clinician do to help me? And many times, really the question is, not so much what we can physically do to help, but how we can better help you cope with some of the challenges with smell loss. And that's really where work by folks like Katie and Chris Kelly really make a difference. So these are slides that are really from the Monell website. I would encourage you all to go to the Monell website. When we look at the prevalence of smell loss, we really see that that's over 10% of the population over the age of 40. And that if we look at the challenges that people face, really they're quite significant. There is a higher level of depression. There is a higher level of feeling anxious. There are challenges in terms of actually being able to eat and to be able to enjoy those parts of life that are really informed by our sense of smell. These are the real challenges that we face. And, I'll jump to the punchline. We don't have any really true cure right now for folks with the loss of sense of smell unless it's due to very specific disorders. So what do I mean by that? Well, the most common causes of anosmia are sinus and nasal disease. So folks that have swelling in their nasal passages or have polyps in their nasal passages, odors can't physically get to the part of your nose where you have your sense of smell. If the odors can't get there, you can't sense them and you have difficulty smelling. Another cause is, of course, the viral or upper respiratory infections that we have been talking about frequently in the news recently. And what we think happens there is that the virus affects and kills some of the cells that actually are sensing the odors. So it is neurotoxic. It hurts the nerves that actually connect up to the brain and really inform our sense of smell. Another cause of smell loss is actually head trauma, or sometimes even surgery. And with head trauma, what happens is that there's a split between the nose and the brain, and when those nerves try to regrow, they don't regrow correctly. Of course, there are some people that are born with loss of sense of smell, and there are some people that have other conditions that are associated with a gradual loss of sense of smell. For example, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's can first present with a loss of sense of smell. And truthfully, if we look across the age continuum, we know that as folks get older, the sense of smell gets a little bit weaker. So looking at the first cause, this is basically a picture of airflow. Tremendous work done here at Monell and at Ohio State by Dr. Zhao, where we can actually see how the little particles, the little odors get deposited into the nose, where they go, and where the sense of smell lives. And it's not just at the very top of the nose, but it's actually throughout the entire upper part of the nose. So obviously, if you have a disruption of this, then you can have a disruption of your sense of smell. We talked a little bit about the viruses and COVID and others, and why do I think that viruses cause this loss of sense of smell, whereas bacterial infections don't necessarily cause the loss of sense of smell? Well, to some extent, we think that maybe this is a body's protective mechanism. You see, nerves from the brain go directly into the nose to sense odors. So if you have a virus that goes into these nerves, it sort of makes sense that the brain would sever those connections not to allow the virus to travel up into the brain and cause a meningitis or encephalitis. Of course, that's just speculation, but the body tends to have ways of controlling these kinds of processes. Obviously, one of the biggest causes from viruses is the pure inflammation and the destruction of the nerve cells themselves. Now, how can you tell if you have a smell loss or if that's what's happening? Well, of course, you can judge whether or not odors are actually getting up into the nose by seeing how you're breathing. You can also do a simple test at home where you can take coffee grounds, which are a relatively pure odorant, and you can see whether or not you can actually smell those coffee grounds. If you can't, then you can get other tests. There are smelling sticks. There is the University of Pennsylvania smell identification tests. And there's also the simple way of just asking someone if they can smell something when you cannot. In terms of the viruses themselves, the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research currently has a survey. And if you could take the survey, it will tell us so much more about whether or not COVID itself is associated with the loss of sense of smell and whether or not there is a recovery from that potential loss of sense of smell. So what can we do to help folks with a loss of sense of smell? I think support groups are tremendously helpful. I can tell you that just knowing that other people have this condition really makes it a lot easier to bear. We can also do things like smell rehabilitation when we actually relearn to smell. If we use certain odors every day and smell them the same way every day, then we should be able over time to develop another smell vocabulary. As the sense of smell returns, it can sometimes be funny. You can smell something that's coffee and it really smells like a rose, or a rose and it really smells like garbage. but hopefully we're starting to make connections and sort of get back our smell vocabulary that we have lost from the traumas and the viruses that we have experienced. About half of people will recover their sense of smell within 2 years after the insult, depending on what it is. So just another brief note here before we look at the questions, and that is, what does the future hold? I think one of the things that the future holds is actually taking olfactory stem cells, that is, cells that develop into the neurons that actually sense the odors, and to take those, culture them, and then transplant them into an anosmic nose, or potentially take the neurons that are very few in somebody's nose that is relatively anosmic, and grow them and put them back in a way to actually get back the sense of smell. This is work that's being done at Monell and being done in many areas across the country, but this work still is years away. The truth is that what we really need to do now is we need to continue partnering with those organizations that really do advocacy and help folks to cope with the loss of sense of smell, as well as work towards a cure. Not sure, Jenifer, if you'd like us to take a look at some of the questions or what you'd like us to do next.
Yeah, Dr. Pribitkin, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Katie. So we do have a question from the audience for you. There's a question from Lynn Greenstein, and she's asking, I would like to know what current or future clinical trials might be available for anosmia patients.
So there was a study out of Bulgaria years ago that basically took platelet-enriched plasma, that is, your blood spun down so only the plasma is there, and then that plasma is injected into the upper part of the nose, and they showed a recovery of sense of smell. Thanks to generous grants by Mr. Mannheimer and others, we are going to be undertaking that research here at Jefferson in conjunction with Monell to actually treat some patients with that platelet-enriched plasma. We draw your blood, we take that serum, and then we inject it or place it up in the upper part of the nose to see if it can stimulate the recovery of the sense of smell. That was just ready to go when COVID hit. So, we've taken a step back, and after the COVID crisis is done, then I would ask you to reach out, if you would like, to Dr. David Rosen at Jefferson, who is the lead investigator, to look at that. We'll be enrolling a small number of patients, and then if things go well, then if there is some indication that it's successful, we'll be opening the trial to many more patients and then doing it in a much more thoughtful way where we'll look at exactly who would benefit and how much needs to be applied. Does it need to be injected? Can it just be put on cotton up into the nose for periods of time to try to stimulate the regrowth of those cells? So there are investigations ongoing. Monell is a good website to do that, and Dr. David Rosen is leading one of our trials at Jefferson.
Thank you. Another question from an audience member concerns theophylline. Karen says to everyone that she's been using theophylline since October, prescribed by her allergist. She's on the highest strength and it has made a difference, but she's still not smelling or tasting consistently. She still gets congested in one nostril, and she's asking, have you found any patients who regained their smell from use of theophylline? She also mentions that it is in the compounded nasal spray.
Yeah, so we have a number of individuals that for many years have touted the benefits of theophylline and pentoxifylline and other types of essentially caffeine-related substances. They are compounded by a compounding pharmacy, put into a nasal spray, and then squirted into the nose 2 to 3 times a day. We have had a few patients that have noted improvement, and the tough part here is, as with much smell research, that depending on when you start the patient on that, they may have naturally recovered anyway without the theophylline. And, it seems, at least as far as we can see, that if people have lost their sense of smell for a long period of time, that the theophylline isn't as effective as if it's used right away. So you sort of have a puzzle, right? You want to use it right away in order to have its maximal effect, but when you use it right away, you're not sure if it's doing the job or if it's just time and recovery that's doing the job. So the studies are mixed, and I don't think there's any harm in using the theophylline in a nasal spray preparation. I think that it offers some potential benefit, usually if it's used earlier in the course of the illness than after it's been around for a long time.
Thank you. And I'll ask you one final question for now, and then we'll have time at the end so that everyone is aware. If you asked a question and we didn't address it right now, we will have time at the very end for Q&A. So this final question for you, Dr. Pribitkin, it's, do we know for sure that the loss is because of loss of olfactory receptor neurons? If yes, is there research happening to restore this functioning using electrophysiological methods, such as in motor or retinal prostheses? And this is from Pulkit Tandon.
So we definitely know that there are many types of smell loss. So in neuronal smell loss, that can be due to loss of the connection. It can be due to death of the individual neurons, or it can be due to malfunction of the receptors at the end organ, or because there's swelling around the neurons that prevent the odors from getting into the neurons. So a lot of different causes. Your real question is, now we have these essentially artificial retinas, and we have ways of actually restoring sight through creating a receptor in the back of the eye that can collect the images and transmit it to the brain. There is nothing like that that's been possible for the sense of smell. And the reason for that is that these are primary neurons. So these neurons don't connect to another neuron and then to another receptor. These neurons directly come from the brain. So there's no good way, in a sense, to connect up to that part of the brain with a kind of receptor device. It's also much, 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 much more complex than the visual system. So, the visual system works on cones and rods, and they react to certain types of light frequencies. Here, we're really reacting to chemical odorants that actually combine with receptors and then send a signal. And there are literally thousands, and in some animal species, hundreds of thousands of odors that can be identified. Those patterns, recreating those patterns, far, far more complex than, for example, a cochlear implant for hearing, or now a visual implant, for the retina to restore sight.
Thank you, Dr. Pribitkin. So next up, and as a reminder, we will try to address questions at the end that we didn't currently get to. So thank you for answering those questions from the audience. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our second panelist. So our second panelist is Torryn Brazell. She is the CEO of the American Tinnitus Association, having served as Managing Director of the American Board of Audiology for 6 years prior to joining ATA. Torryn is a Take Down the Stigma mental health care advocate, serving on 2 nonprofit boards that focus on serving the mental health community. ATA was founded in 1971. It is the nation's foremost organization committed to improving the lives of people with tinnitus and hyperacusis by providing hope for a quieter future through education, advocacy, and research toward a cure. Welcome, Torryn.
Well, thank you for having me. Thanks, Monell Center, for asking me to be on this panel. It's an extremely important panel, and you probably ask yourself, why would somebody who works for a tinnitus association be on this panel? First, tinnitus is invisible. So how do we advocate for funding and raise awareness for this invisible condition? Second, there is no cure. We also do not have a cure. We also have seen tinnitus be caused by TBI, traumatic brain injury. But normally it's because of loud noises, either one enormous loud noise or loud noise over time. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slideshow and share. Uh-oh. We're back to where we were before.
You're correct, Torryn. This is the right screen.
Okay, great. The first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about ATA, founded in 1971. We have 3 areas that we constantly are focusing on. And that is all the staff and consultants are compassionate. We provide credible information, and we provide easy to understand information. And we have two groups of people that are constantly contacting us. Those are patients and healthcare providers. One of our main goals is to promote tinnitus relief, and we do that through grant research, finding cures, validating effective treatments, and better understanding of the mechanisms involved in this invisible condition. I'm going a little bit backwards. This was actually the last question that was in our package to answer, but I wanted to answer it first. If there was a cure for tinnitus, your ENT or audiologist would tell you, and it's the same. There is such fear, and you're so scared when you get tinnitus. You get anxiety, mood swings, depression, and people start going online and looking for Dr. Google. And so we're very similar in this sense. People are constantly going online trying to find herbal remedies, holistic remedies, and we're constantly educating our community that is, if it was absolutely curable, the FDA would have already approved that holistic product. So what are our main achievements? Well, ATA has funded about $6 million to date in seed grants, and many of our leading tinnitus researchers now and around the world, their work and their careers has been advanced by our seed grants. We're a recognized leader for patient interests within the patient medical and research communities, and this is extremely important because this allows us to advocate for more funding for tinnitus research. There are about 25 million people in the U.S. with this disorder and condition, and about 40 to 50,000 come to our website every month, and most of these are unique. At times we have 90,000 people coming to our website, so you can imagine the amount of rich research and treatment data that we must have on our website. Another achievement is that we're invited to speak at major conferences in the field, which is extremely important because we have to raise awareness for an invisible condition. How are we funded? Generosity. 95% of all funds from the ATA are from donors. You can become a member. We have trusts and bequests that are given to us. 20, 30, 40 years ago, the ATA helped somebody who was in absolute, could have been suicide ideation, could have been tremendous anxiety or depression, and they remembered us because of the compassion and because of our reputation, and they put us in their will. We receive no government funding or outside grants. Monell asks, how are our funds used? Well, our seed grants are around $25,000 a year up to 2 years. And this is normally about half of a lab to employ somebody in a research lab. We have a magazine that's very well known and recognized around the world. It serves patients, researchers, healthcare providers. We have a new program called TINAP where we have spun up 7 audiologists trained who speak directly with callers about their quality of life. If staff cannot help them, then we then go and move into a telehealth mode, and it's usually a 15-20 minute intake, and there are referrals, have you tried this, recommendations, etc., and that has been so well received. We also have 17 global tinnitus researchers that are maintained by the ATA. So those are mostly how we're what we use our funds for. I did want to point out we also use our funds to create tinnitus tools. We're constantly providing documentation to healthcare providers, the tinnitus community, in order to convey information in a very easy way. And this one is almost like an if-then. If this happens, then what do you do? Who do you see? So this is a patient intake document that we created, and that is free. It's on our website. It's free to all healthcare providers, and it's the same with the patient navigator. The patient navigator is for the patient. What do you do first if you determine that you have ringing in your ears or crickets in your ears? And it takes you through A, B, C, D, all the way through what to do. And it's very calming, and it's something we immediately provide to those callers that contact us. For our grants, what are the purpose and intent of our grants? The number one is to increase the number of researchers in the field. There are nowhere near the number of researchers that we should have. It's a very difficult type of a condition to research. Is it audiological? Is it neurological? We are right now only in animal behavioral models in maybe the last couple of years. We want to open up research opportunities with seed grants. So if somebody is considering tinnitus research, we have seed grant funding. And we want to push innovative and original data. And this is key, because if you want to go, a researcher wants to get major funding and go to the NIH, whichever department they're in, they need data. NIH is not going to provide massive research funding unless you have original data, and that's where the ATA comes in. We can't fund large-scale research, but we do serve a niche where they can get data and then they can go toward the NIH, DOD, other major funding organizations and get large grants. So what is our relationship with NIH? The NIDCD, which is the organization we work directly with, National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders. We attend relevant meetings. I attend all of their advisory meetings. I meet with many of their staff on an ongoing basis. We receive and send communications out. We utilize their public data. For example, somebody was asking about clinical trials. You can go to clinicaltrials.gov, G-O-V right now, and you can see all the publicly funded NIH trials on any type of condition, and you can just do a search. So we constantly are using their data for clinical trials. We advocate for more tinnitus funding from them. And they also have a strategic plan that's updated every 10 years. They're currently in comment, NIDCD, and there's another one that's in comment, maybe mental health right now. And we make sure that all of our researchers, patients, and healthcare providers send in comments for their strategic plan to let them know we're here, we're important, and we need to be in your strategic plan. One thing that happened in 2018, which was enormously important, is one of our members of our own ATA Scientific Advisory Committee members was appointed to the NIDCD's advisory group, and it's those 18 people that review grant funding applications. So that was many, many years of work of cultivating relationships, and Dr. Fenggang Wang is from Irvine, UC Irvine, and he's a worldwide known tinnitus researcher. So we're very lucky to have him on that advisory panel. I was asked as a panelist, what is the patient advocate advice? And I thought about this a lot, and it's really the patient. The patient is the voice. The patient needs to tell their story to researchers, your story to other patients, which is key. Other people feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so alone. But when you talk to somebody about your condition, you're not alone anymore. Healthcare providers, public officials, tell your stories to researchers. We've found that researchers feel somewhat of a disconnect because they're in a very narrowly focused clinical trial, or sometimes they're doing writing. And researchers love to hear from patients, and it also reinforces that their work is important. It's incurable, it's invisible, so compelling narrative is extremely important for feeding awareness. The other advocate advice is to become the go-to organization or site. We are it. There are other organizations that say we do hearing, we do Meniere's disease, we do tinnitus, but we are the only organization that focuses on tinnitus. So when you call or email, any kind of contact, you know you're going to get compassionate, meaningful advice. What are the major tactics to build awareness? There's quite a few, but the two that have worked very well for us is speaking at conferences. I speak all the time at conferences. I'll give you an example. I go to the Otolaryngology National Conference every year, and I speak to ENTs on how to reframe their advice to tinnitus patients. And ENTs, many times we are told, not anecdotally, but actually told by tinnitus patients, that ENTs say, well, there's no cure and you're going to have to live with it. And what I do is I teach the ENTs that this is no longer what to say to tinnitus patients, but there's a whole list of things you can say in 5 minutes, providing hope, providing referrals, how to handle your tinnitus patients. And the tinnitus patient then leaves much lighter, less fearful. Obviously, they're not cured. There may be treatments that they can utilize, but that's one of the things that I do. The other is I go to audiology conferences. It's extremely important that there are healthcare providers that know how to deal with a specific condition. And there's one CPT code for tinnitus, which is a diagnosis code. You can use a few other codes, but there's no way that healthcare providers can actually make money handling tinnitus, because a tinnitus intake is about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Tinnitus patients want to be listened to, so I have an entire speech and a whole business model on teaching audiologists how, if you would like to go into tinnitus specialty care, this is how you can actually have a viable business. And it's been very well received, and the number of healthcare providers has increased dramatically over the last 3 years that provide tinnitus healthcare. And the last is, the second most important, is, of course, providing relevant input to government agencies. I've spoken in front of the FDA, the NIDCD. We meet twice annually with the Congressional Hearing Health Caucus, and the Department of Defense provides a lot of tinnitus research funding. So we provide a lot of one-on-one and constantly the care and feeding of government agencies. And my last slide is regarding researcher relationships. I was asked, what is our relationship, the ATA, with our researchers? Again, our 17-member scientific advisory committee. They're global researchers. They review our applications. They write articles for our magazine. They act as ambassadors. But more importantly, they allow me, my staff, consultants to stay abreast of research in the field. Just like today, the very first question, tell us what's happening in the research field. What is happening in clinical trials? That's our number one question also. So we support both basic research and clinical research, because until there's a cure, we need to make sure that they both are important and treated equally as far as funding is concerned. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any kind of questions.
Torryn, thank you so much for speaking. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. So there's a question from the audience member, and it's an anonymous attendee. They state there are several patient reports of tinnitus with COVID-19. Are you aware of any studies looking at this? I know that this is not a focus of GCCR, but I believe they should also look at the symptom along with taste and smell loss.
Say the very beginning again, though, the very beginning of the question.
Yeah, there are several patient reports of tinnitus with COVID-19. Are you aware of any studies looking at this?
Right. Actually, the ATA has in process a survey with a university in Texas that we are putting together regarding COVID-19 and tinnitus, because we are aware of the tinnitus. There are specific drugs, ototoxicity, that cause tinnitus, and one hydrochloroquine, I can never say the name, in malaria, it's a malaria drug, sometimes causes tinnitus, and it is one of the drugs that actually many doctors have actually stopped using because there hasn't been a clinical trial on it for COVID-19, but it does cause tinnitus and people are concerned about that. But we are aware of it. We are looking at a survey right now because COVID it's not over yet, and we will be gathering information. It's going to be going out in about 3 weeks to 54,000 people to see what happened with their tinnitus, have they received tinnitus, etc. So,
thank you. And then my final question for you for now, do you often see tinnitus in neurodegenerative diseases?
yes. Also, before I forget, you can say tinnitus and you can say tinnitus.
I think I've said it both ways.
Yes, you have, and I get asked that question all the time. So it's a perfectly fine to say it either way, whatever you're comfortable with.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we are going to move on to our third panelist, and I'll go ahead and do her introduction shortly. Before I do that, however, I do want to point out to you that we do have a hashtag for this event. So if you all would like to post on social media, you can use the hashtag #SmellChangeConvo, and that will create the hashtag and get everything going. All right, so next up, I'd like to introduce our third panelist for the day. Christine Broderick is an engagement officer with the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI, in Washington, D.C. Previously, she was a patient and a family engagement manager at the National Partnership for Women and Families. Her work focuses on supporting meaningful partnerships between patients and families and other healthcare stakeholders, including hospitals, ambulatory practices, and measure developers. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks everyone. I'm excited to be part of such a great panel and such a great audience. I'm just going to share my screen, pull up my slides. Bear with me one moment. Okay. So I'll start with an introduction to PCORI and just share a little bit about who we are, the research that we fund, our approach to engagement in research, what we've been learning, and how you can get involved. First, a little bit of history. The Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI for short, was created by the Affordable Care Act in 2010 to ensure that research would be more accessible and relevant to patients and others making healthcare decisions in real-world settings. And we were intentionally called the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and that has made a big difference because it means we were specifically authorized to conduct the kind of research that engages patients and stakeholders and addresses the questions that are important to them. So in order for projects to receive funding from PCORI, the questions being studied and the outcomes that are included in those studies must be of importance to patients and those who care for them, and the studies must engage patients and stakeholders as partners in the research process. And the kind of research that PCORI funds primarily is comparative effectiveness research, clinical comparative effectiveness research, or CER for short. And CER compares the balance of benefits and harms and the outcomes associated with different proven options for healthcare in order to enable people in consultation with their healthcare providers to decide which is best for them. And patient-centered outcomes research, which we call PCOR, is a type of comparative effectiveness research, essentially, that explicitly considers patients' needs and preferences and the outcomes that are important to them, and investigates what works, for whom, under what circumstances. I wanted to say a few words about our approach to engagement. Our work is really grounded in the belief that if patients and other stakeholders are involved in all PCORI activity, the ultimate product that we provide, which is research, will be more relevant, more useful, more trustworthy to patients and clinicians in making healthcare decisions, and more likely to be used by all stakeholders. And we continue to emphasize the importance of this throughout our work. This is really about changing the culture of research. This is a visual snapshot of our engagement rubric, which is one of the many tools that are available on our website. PCORI has created opportunities for engagement across all the work we do and in all the projects that we fund. PCORI requires research projects to engage patients and other stakeholders, but we don't prescribe how this has to happen. So instead, PCORI provides general guidance and resources to allow project investigators and teams to best determine what works for them. The engagement rubric illustrates how input from patient and stakeholder partners can be incorporated throughout the entire research project and process in planning the study, conducting the study, and disseminating study results. And it identifies a variety of options and activities that stakeholders can consider, as well as giving some real-world examples. So in terms of what we've learned, PCORI is constantly learning about engagement, what's happening, what methods and approaches are working when it comes to engagement. And we're now at a point where we have a lot of experience and evidence to draw from. So what have we learned? Engagement makes a difference. And now we have really a large body of evidence to be able to point to and demonstrate that. It impacts, whoops, sorry, I'm gonna go back. It impacts how studies are created and designed in important ways. Engagement impacts how study materials are developed. It influences researchers' understanding of the needs of patients and people and organizations. We've also learned about the challenges and obstacles that our awardees and stakeholders face, and this helps to inform the resources and the tools that we create. And we share those tools not only with awardees, but many with the broader community. At the end of the day, engaging patients and stakeholders in research amounts to nothing short of culture change, as I mentioned before. It's really a new way of operating for a lot of folks, and it requires learning new skills, but we hear from researchers in PCORI projects that engagement has become really an integral and valuable part of projects for them and the work that they do. So I shared some more aggregate lessons, but also wanted to share a little bit about individual impact. This quote is from a researcher in one of our funded projects, reflecting on the engagement in their study and how impactful it was to have the community guiding the research, and how it really helped to overturn some assumptions in ways that were helpful to the work. So I wanted to highlight a couple ways to get involved. One, and Katie already mentioned this one, is the PCORI Ambassador Program, which is a network of volunteer PCORI supporters who are working to change the culture of research. Ambassadors include patients, caregivers, advocates, clinicians, really a wide range of stakeholders. It is a wonderful group of people. I think 3 of the folks on the call today from the anosmia community are ambassadors, so you would be in good company. There are a variety of different activities and opportunities that you can participate in as an ambassador, depending on what you're most interested in. There are PCORI events and programs. There are opportunities to collaborate with other ambassadors. There are opportunities to explore new tools and resources that PCORI and partners are putting out. Ambassador coffee breaks are monthly 20-minute webinars that provide program updates from PCORI, but also include ambassador spotlights. So it's a great way to connect with and hear from other ambassadors who are doing work related to patient-centered outcomes research. And these are just a few pictures of some of our fabulous ambassadors. And if you're interested in learning more about the program, you can go to our website, which is linked here. And I also wanted to highlight the Engagement Award program. This is PCORI's funding mechanism for research support. So not the actual conduct of research, but for building capacity for patient-centered outcomes research. Engagement awards are intended to bring more patients, caregivers, clinicians, and other healthcare stakeholders into the research process. The goal is to support projects that will help build a community that's better able to participate in patient-centered outcomes research and comparative effectiveness research. and help to disseminate study results to communities that can use this information. So, this is really central to our mission to fund useful results that will help patients and those who care for them, make better informed decisions. Getting an engagement award is a great way to really help communities build a deeper understanding of patient-centered outcomes research and comparative effectiveness research, and get ready to engage more deeply. There are 3 types of awards that you see on your screen. There is also a new special opportunity related to engagement and dissemination of patient-centered outcomes research and comparative effectiveness research in the context of COVID-19, which I know is of great interest to this community. This special funding announcement will support projects that help communities increase their ability to participate across all phases of patient-centered outcomes research and comparative effectiveness research while responding to societal changes resulting from the pandemic. So if this is something that you're interested in, or any of our awards, I would encourage you to check out our website, the Engagement Awards section. And here are another few pictures of some of our wonderful engagement awardees. And again, on our website, you can learn more about some of these projects and what has been done. So before I wrap up, I wanted to just put up a quick slide with links to some of our tools. I'm not sure if, I think slides may be shared after the event, but would also welcome you to reach out if you have questions or are looking for more information. Our website is a terrific resource. Thanks again.
Thanks, Christine. So a question that I have for you is, and to go into a little more detail about the PCORI Ambassador Program. Do I have to have an organization already in order to get engaged with a part of this program? Do I have to have any kind of special credentials, or how can I apply?
You do not have to have any special credentials or be affiliated with an organization. In order to apply, you would just go to the Ambassador Program section of our website, which I may have linked here. Let me go back to that just to, I'm going to just see if I can click into the microsite here to show you what it looks like. But you would fill out a survey to tell us about yourself and apply that way. And you can learn more about other ambassadors, where folks are from, and there are just a range of resources here to learn about. But it's a really wide-ranging group of folks. No specific, expertise or organizational affiliation is required. It's, lots of patients involved and other stakeholders as well.
Thank you. And there's a question from an audience member, Pamela. She's asking, who are the recipients of the engagement awards? Individuals or nonprofits or organized patient groups?
So it's a range of groups that receive engagement awards. It is tends to be more organizations or entities that are, launching projects to build communities or find ways to disseminate PCORI findings or PCORI's funded projects findings among different communities. But if you're looking for more, more specific information about the types of groups that have received those awards, that information is available on our website, and you can kind of click through and see the types of groups that have been part of this program.
Thank you. Another question for you comes from listener Jazz. They ask, would there be ways you would recommend early career researchers begin developing these partnerships when in institutions or departments that have little past or existing research collaborations with people with anosmia?
So is the question, can you repeat it one more time? I think the question is about partnering with.
Yes, I'll repeat it again. Would there be ways you would recommend early career researchers begin developing these partnerships when in institutions or departments that have little past or existing research collaborations with people with anosmia? Yeah,
it's a great question. So as I said, engaging with with patients and other stakeholders is new to many folks, and there are a number of different ways you can get started. And I would encourage you, there are a lot of tools on our website for you to check out with some good tips and ideas for getting started, and what avenues you can pursue to start bringing people more into the work that you're doing, and what that can look like. It's a great it's a great set of tools, so that I think would be a good place to start.
Excellent. And the final question for you for now, what is the yearly budget of PCORI for grants?
So the yearly budget, hold on, let me, so I can share, so that by the end of 2019, the total approved budget that we have funded, so we have approved more than $2.57 billion to fund more than 700 research-related projects. So that's over the course of our existence, not annually. And I don't have the annual number in front of me, but I could follow up with that if that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Christine. So now I would like to move on and introduce everyone to our fourth panelist. Our fourth panelist is Chrissi Kelly, and she is a smell loss patient advocate and founder of absent.org in the United Kingdom. Chrissi lost her sense of smell in 2012, and since then she has supported thousands of other people with smell loss through smell training. Most recently, her work has included counseling COVID-19 patients who are experiencing smell loss. Welcome, Chrissi.
Hi, Katie. Thank you very much for that. It is, oops, now let me just share my screen. Okay. Oops. So I want to start by saying thank you very much to Monell for inviting me today, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I mean, obviously, just despite what's going on with COVID-19, it's wonderful to be able to have this conference today on this online platform, because it answers that question that so many people come to me and say, I wish I could join you, but I live too far away. So if I've never interacted with you before in a video kind of environment, it's lovely for me to be able to sort of see you, even though I can't really see you. And anyway, so thank you very much to Monell for inviting me here. Right, so I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. First, just a tiny bit of background. I grew up in Maine, and I've been living here in the UK for 30 years. Oops, let's make that go away. So that's why I have an American accent, even though I live in the UK. I haven't let that rub off. As Katie said, I lost my sense of smell in 2012. And my journey was very much an emotional roller coaster. I started out feeling kind of stunned, and then I felt extremely worried as the weeks went by. I know many people in the COVID-19 group are talking about these kind of feelings. That level of worry kind of rose to a panic level after a couple of months. And then for me, because my smell loss was total, I found myself sinking into a really terrible depression. And so I just want to, I want to speak for many people here in this group who have sat with a GP who has said, I'm sorry, there's really nothing we can do for you. And therefore, my mission became to provide a resource that I wished I had had myself. what happened after about a year of smell loss is that I was told about smell training, and I started reading about that and immediately became very interested in it, mostly because I could observe my own response to smell training, and it really did make me feel good. So it started out as an interest. I was just I've always been a very curious person, so I was really interested in what smell training was. I also, because I have a vaguely, I always say vaguely scientific background, I studied archaeology, so archaeological science is nothing like hard sciences, but nonetheless, we do know a few principles about science. And so as I was thinking about smell training, I was thinking to myself, how do I make this something that could be measured? You know, how could you quantify smell training and see whether or not anything good was coming out of it? And so that is essentially what I did. Learning about smell training and smell training itself felt really empowering to me. And when I was just absolutely floundering and in this terrible Black depression, I felt like it was the way I could get out of it, by feeling inspired by what I was doing, feeling like I was taking control over what I was doing. This tiny little bit of control made me feel that it was better to be a student of my affliction rather than a victim. And I think that when a doctor says to you, there is no hope, you will never get cured, or you're going to have to live with it, that's the moment when your heart starts beating and you think, and you hear the dungeon door closing, and you think, oh my God, this is going to be my life. And I just wanted to fight against that. And so that is where the charity sort of springs from. I have to say that being connected with the olfactory community, and in particular, I mean, being welcomed so warmly by Monell, has made all the difference. I've met some wonderful people. I've met Nancy Rawson at Dresden, where I've been privileged enough to take some courses with Professor Hummel. All these experiences have kind of galvanized my interest, and I am so grateful and feel so privileged to be able to speak for patients and to pass on my knowledge to them. So the question was, what's going to happen to Absent, my charity, in tomorrow and in a couple of years and further down the road? Absent has come on a quantum leap in the last 2 months. We've more than doubled our patient base. We are answering all kinds of questions that, this is COVID-19. Looks like there might be some surprises in it in terms of what we normally see with post-viral smell loss. So I've kind of taken a giant leap in the last 3 months. In the beginning, it was more, I wanted to sort of just help patients. I didn't really have a very good idea of what patient advocacy was. That picture has changed now. I'm very much propelled into the patient advocacy area, and that's becoming more and more important for me. That's where we are right now. In a couple of years, I hope that we get recognition from policymaking institutions about the need for more funding, greater awareness, and just a better outcome in the long term for people who have smell loss. And then my long-term goals for Absent are to move into that space where we start to address the needs of people who have age-related smell loss later in life. I think there are ways we can engage with that group, and I plan to be at the forefront of that as well. What does it mean to be an anosmic? We are a very disparate group. I've already seen comments in the chat channel. We've got people who have head injuries, people who have allergies, people who have polyps, obviously people who are post-viral. I always say, if I started a Facebook group called People Who Didn't Get to Work on Time, in that group, we would have people who got a flat tire on their way, people who overslept, people who didn't have a map, you know, all kinds of reasons that they arrived at the same place doesn't mean that they have that much in common. In addition to that, if you really cast your net wide, there are many anosmics who never report their smell loss because they recover so quickly. And I think that is clouding the issue slightly of what we understand about COVID-19 recovery, because in a normal post-viral situation, you might recover in a week or two and no one would ever hear about your smell loss, and therefore it would never be part of the studies that we have, you know, in the library now on post-viral anosmia. So those people are silent. There are also plenty of people out there who don't even know the word anosmia. Now that is changing. But there are people who are just coming into the group now who say, oh, I didn't know this was actually a thing, and I'm very glad to be part of this group. So the group of anosmics, we are disparate. We are, sometimes there are great chunks missing who really need to be brought into the conversation. And as I said, each of these groups has different needs. And we have to address the needs of the whole person and not just the nose. And you'll see a colorful image on the lower right-hand side of this slide, which I tried to create something that summed up the fact that we've got all this other stuff going on. By the time a patient gets in front of the doctor, you know, this is sometimes 3 months, 4 months until they get to see an ENT. The problem is no longer in their nose. The problem has seeped into every aspect of their life. And that will be anger, resentment, anxiety over safety issues, over body odor. There may be an altered relationship with food leading to weight loss or weight gain. So there are all these things going on. It is a holistic problem. So what do we want to achieve? At the moment, we don't have a cure, but I do think that it is really important that we find a way to make people experience some level of healing. And this healing is not, like the previous slide, it's not just about the nose. If you were to have a bad car accident and get completely banged up and be full of scars, you might not ever look exactly the way you used to. And I think that with smell loss, you have to sort of adopt that point of view. Your smell loss may never be what it was before, but there will come a day when you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you think, I can go out there and I can participate in life again. And that's where we have to, that's what we have to aim for. My recovery from post-viral anosmia was quite good, and it was good enough for me to have a really rich quality of life. It will never be the same. I still have a level of parosmia that I'm sure will be with me for the rest of my life, but my brain fills in the blanks. I feel happy about what I can smell, and I think that smell training and addressing all these issues that I've just mentioned now is a way for that to happen to the whole person. Finally, we've been scratching our heads for the last however many years I've known the Monell, saying to ourselves, how are we going to raise awareness? And right now, awareness is here. Anosmia is a word that has come into everyone's kitchen. You know, it's on the pages of my local newspaper. Everyone now knows about smell loss and COVID-19. So this is a golden opportunity right now. We need to keep the light focused on smell loss, not just for COVID-19 patients, but for the betterment of the situation of all these other people in this disparate community who've experienced smell loss. Because it's not just about the post-virals. It's about the people who have congenital anosmia, who have head injuries, who have polyps, who have other kinds of smell loss. We need to engage everyone and make sure that everyone is heard and that we have a way of raising awareness and treating the whole person. So that is sort of my talk, and I will turn it back over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. So there have been so many amazing questions for Chrissy at this point that we are going to hold those for her optional Q&A at the very end. There's going to be time for you all to stay on the line and have an in-depth conversation with Chrissy about all of the questions that just came up. So please know that we did see them. We see them coming in, and there is an optional smell loss support discussion with her at the end of our panel today. So you'll have a whole hour that we can be on the call and have those questions asked and answered. So next up, I would like to introduce our white paper presenter. So Dr. Joel Mainland is an olfactory neuroscientist at the Monell Center. One of the many projects that he is conducting at Monell is a study on the genetic variation in olfactory receptors in congenitally anosmic individuals. Dr. Mainland will be presenting, but he's also joined today by Dr. Danielle Reed, who will be standing by to take questions. Dr. Reed is a geneticist at Monell, most notable for her work in genetic variation in taste. She is also Monell's Associate Director. Dr. Mainland will give an overview of the Gaps and Opportunities paper that comes out of the Identifying Treatments for Taste and Smell Disorders, or ITTSD conference that Monell hosted in 2018, along with the University of Colorado and the Center for Taste and Smell at the University of Florida. So welcome to Dr. Mainland.
Great, thanks for having me. So in 2018, we held a conference, the ITTSD. This stands for Identifying Treatments for Taste and Smell Disorders. So as you heard previously, a lot of people, over 12% of the population, over 40 experience taste or smell loss during their lifetime. And so a lot of these people are very frustrated with the fact that there are very few treatments available. And we wanted to put together a conference to address that need. There are also a couple changes in the landscape that really prompted this conference. So for example, there have been, within 2 months preceding this conference, there were 5 papers that came out that were all recent clinical successes that used stem cell and gene therapies in humans. And so this really suggested that the field had been maturing, and we wanted to take advantage of the fact that these translational opportunities had really moved into human trials and bring people out to take a look at this in conjunction with chemosensory researchers. So we wanted to gather experts from other fields, people studying the skin, the eye, the ear, who would join us and talk about the different problems that they had had in bringing these techniques and regulatory hurdles, things like that. So another piece of the conference, we really wanted to engage people from different groups, so researchers, patients, clinicians, and have them all come together and communicate. And so we could bundle feedback from all these different groups. And so this conference was put on by the 3 groups at the bottom, which are all research centers studying chemosensory systems. So we collected feedback from the attendees and found that they fell into 3 main groups. So first was this cellular approaches. Again, there are a lot of cellular approaches in other systems, in hearing and vision and skin, and a lot of them share mechanisms of cell loss and regeneration with taste and smell. And so the second sort of broad category was measurement of dysfunction. So we heard from a lot of clinicians describing how they could use better diagnostic tools. So where's the problem? Is it a peripheral problem in the nose? Is it a problem in the nerve? Is it a problem in the brain? And in addition, it's hard to do therapy unless we can really reliably measure improvement. So the third category was to look at increasing awareness and research capacity. So you've heard about this from a couple different speakers today, and is one of the goals of this particular meeting. But we know that stem cell research in vision is much farther ahead than it is in the chemosensory system, for example. And part of that is just due to the fact that there is more advocacy groups, more resources supporting that type of research. So when we talk about these new research into cellular approaches, I don't want to get too detailed here, but basically there are a number of different resources that researchers need. So cultivating human olfactory and taste cell lines by isolating these particular cells and looking at them in a dish, we can sort of move very quickly in trying out different treatments and approaches. A little bit larger scale is organoids. So this is somewhere between an individual cell and an actual intact organ. But being able to grow these organoids in a dish, again, allows us to test things very rapidly in a reduced setting. And similarly, we want to continue to collaborate across modalities. So it's very important that we work with other researchers as they talk about the different problems that they've had, the different infrastructure that's been really key for them, and learning from each other and developing this infrastructure ourselves. So to talk about measurement of dysfunction, we really know that self-report is notoriously poor for chemosensory function. So we really need to be using objective tests for this. We also know that chemosensory loss precedes cognitive deficits in Alzheimer's. It precedes motor tremors in Parkinson's. And we know that it can often precede cough and fever in COVID-19. Yet in all these cases, we've learned about the chemosensory loss after the other symptoms. And this is partly due to a lack of widespread measurement and testing. So in the US, newborns are screened for hearing before they leave the hospital. Vision's checked routinely as the visual system develops, but there are no widespread measurements of smell and taste. So many people don't realize that they can't smell, for example, until they're much older. We also know that chemosensory dysfunction is associated with things like Kallmann syndrome and Wilson's disease, but frequently in the early reports of these syndromes, it's missed. And identifying these types of connections has really helped us understand olfaction and the different pieces that play a role. So I think sort of as practical suggestions here, it's important to be adding things like smell and taste measurement to electronic health records, to disseminate the current measurement tools, and of course, develop new tools. So there are a number of methods for presenting odors to people or tastes to people and getting responses from them. But we need new tools that can really look at where in the nervous system is this deficit happening? Is it in the periphery? Is it in the nerve? Things like that. And in addition, we want to really increase awareness and research capacity. So again, much of this is touched on this, but patient advocacy is really key. Advocates play a really important role in contributing to public awareness and getting public support, financial support. They're really key for communicating between researchers and funders and patients and talk about the need for and results of the research for the different groups. So for example, one thing that came up at the meeting, which is similar to what was talked about with the ATA, is that clinicians really report that there's a key obstacle and that there's no insurance code in the US for chemosensory testing. And so, being able to help clinicians do their job by changing the sort of infrastructure of the health system is also important. And I think one of the big takeaways from this is that there's a huge need for this type of sharing of information on smell and taste disorders. And we really had a large response to this conference. In addition, we need to be able to train new researchers. So as we learn about these stem cell and gene therapies, we need to be able to train new researchers who are familiar with both chemosensory science and these techniques to develop our ability to do research. And finally, I want to thank the 3 centers who worked together to really make this conference possible, the staff and faculty at Monell for helping to organize this conference in a lot of different ways. And I want to thank funding agencies, CARI, Sensonics, and the NIDCD for financial support for the conference. And finally, I want to thank the patients and the clinicians and the scientists who all attended and gave their feedback for this conference. And I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mainland. So in the interest of time, we're actually going to hold any questions that you all have for Dr. Mainland to be answered offline. So please do continue to ask your questions, and if we don't have time to answer them today at the end, we will make sure that they get sent over to Dr. Mainland, Dr. Reed, and then we can respond to those offline for you all. So next up, I'd like to introduce our GCCR presenter. Dr. Valentina Parma is a research assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Temple University. She studies the ways in which unconscious cues, such as odors, influence social behavior. Dr. Parma completed her postdoctoral training at the Monell Center. She is the head of the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research, which was created to understand reports of chemosensory issues related to COVID-19 on a global basis. So welcome, Dr. Parma.
Thank you very much, Katie, and it's a pleasure to be here. So let me share my screen first, and so I can tell you a little bit more about the GCCR. So the GCCR, or the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research, has been started like a few weeks ago on March 21st with the aim of understanding how the chemosensory reports related to COVID-19 are coming about. And one of our main goals was to unite chemosensory scientists globally trying to understand this issue that is touching like many of us from different countries. Give me just a minute. I just saw my screen. So one second, I'm sorry. Somehow my screen is not working. So, and I'm back. And it all really started with a call from patients. So we saw on Twitter, and we were contacted, many of us were active on Twitter, many chemosensory scientists got questions about what is going on here. I'm losing my sense of smell. I have a weird taste feeling, and I think I have COVID-19, or I was tested for COVID-19. Can you please help? We need to understand more. And basically, Monell responded. And as you can see, a thread started like on March 20th saying, scientists working at Monell, you are experts in smell and taste. Can you please try to see what's going on? And then we started adding like people currently trained at Monell or working at Monell, started adding people of the Monell family at large, and that's how I got included in this thread. This then became a phone call with people a little bit of all over the world, mostly the US and Europe. And in the end, on Saturday, March 21st, the leadership team got together in their first call. And as you can see, we're 9 people, mostly located in the US and Europe, that are trying almost on a daily basis, trying to push this quest forward. On the top row, Danny Reed, Catherine Ola, myself, and Polly Joseph were all either current or former Monell scientists. And then we have other countries represented like Turkey, Israel, Germany, and the UK with Chrissi. As you can see already from our composition, we try to incorporate a dialogue and maintain a dialogue between patients and scientists from the very beginning. And we recognize that our getting together is really dependent on these insights that were coming from patients. Our big motivation at this moment is to coordinate worldwide crowdsourced research to understand the reports of COVID-19 and the chemosensory issues. And we want to do that in a way that is not only using this pandemic to provide information to the community, but also we are at the same time creating the structure to move forward different types of chemosensory studies and improve chemosensory knowledge down the road. Right now, our bandwidth, it's really focused on COVID-19, but we are creating a big network that reaches like outside of the general associations and connections that we have among scientists and clinicians. And patient advocates are a big part of this. As Katie mentioned in the beginning, she is part of the patient advocacy committee, as Chrissi is. And so we're trying to include the different patient advocacy groups that have a direct contact with some of you and the broader community of patients with chemosensory issues. And we would like to hear from you what is your experience, and we'll ask them to actually help the GCCR better understand where the patients stand and what are their experiences at the moment. But who is the GCCR? So as I mentioned, we're a very newly formed
Research Consortium, which is mostly populated by scientists, but we have clinicians, we have patient advocates, we have people extremely skilled in computer scientists, artists, journalists. We're a very varied crowd that is all interested in trying to raise awareness for anosmia and chemosensory conditions in general. At the moment, we are 660 contributors, but actually I checked a little bit before starting the talk, and we were already 665. So as you can see, this consortium is growing pretty fast. And the members, the signing members that are actively involved in research at the moment are 426, spread across 52 countries across the 6 populated continents. So we really are trying to reach wide. And we're going to do that as a first step with the GCCR questionnaire. So our first questionnaire tries to understand and to characterize smell loss, but also taste loss and chemesthesis loss or change in general in patients with COVID-19 and other respiratory illnesses. And so with the input from the patient community that got us together, scientists, and in particular world leading experts on the topics of chemosensation have gotten together and thought about questions to capture the nuances of chemosensation and COVID-19. And what we want to do is to collect big data from all over the world and produce solid evidence-based knowledge on this relation. So far we have seen, and the news have reported many accounts of smell loss or smell changes in relation to COVID-19. Very recently, the CDC included smell and taste change and loss in particular in among the symptoms for COVID-19. What we're looking at with the GCCR is to characterize more deeply these reports and understand the nuances. And this can be helpful on many different levels, and not only for the COVID-19 anosmic community at the moment. One of our interests also, and one of our footprint at the moment, is to use the knowledge that the GCCR produces and make it available to everybody, to the whole community of scientists. And we do that by following the rules of open science. So we are holding ourselves to the highest scientific standards. So we need to have our questions being fully backed up by theoretical approaches, and then we want all of our data and all of our thinking related to the questions we ask one after the other to be made available for the public to experience. We're also looking at being extremely inclusive and collaborative, and this has been an extremely challenging but rewarding task at the moment. Just imagine having a meeting with all of the people that I mentioned, or hundreds of people, and try to find one time zone that is good for us to have representation for all the different countries that we're looking at. Last, we want to disseminate our knowledge and make it available outside of the community of scientists and clinicians, and we're doing that already, trying to push some of the messages of the GCCR over social media. We reached out to the press, and we're very indebted to the people that are helping crafting these communication strategies with us. And then, of course, as scientists, we're primarily focused on producing scientific publications of different sorts. Again, in the spirit of open science, we want to make available our findings as early as we can by archiving our preprints. And so even before we have a review board at the journal that can actually look at our results, we're going to make our findings available. As of today, our questionnaire, which again tries to understand smell, taste, and chemesthesis in people with respiratory disorders and that they have respiratory symptoms in the past 2 weeks, is being deployed in 24 languages as of now. And this is one of the pages of our web page that you can visit. I have a link at the end if you're curious about it. And I can give you a first preview of the insights that are coming out of the first analysis of the data set that we have produced. So from the first more or less 4,000 respondents, that all of whom have a COVID-19 diagnosis, whether given by a doctor after a clinical assessment or through a lab test, the data that we're finding is that yes, most people seem to have a sudden smell loss, but it's not only a smell loss. We also see changes at the level of taste and kinesthesis. Interestingly, this sudden smell loss is unrelated, unexplained by nasal blockage. So contrary to some other experiences, like a blocked nose, it doesn't seem to be responsible at all for the smell loss in this cohort of patients. And when it comes to qualitative smell changes and parosmia and phantosmia, we see them being quite rare in this population, around 7-8% in the group. But what we can say is that we're only looking at people within 2 weeks of their symptoms. And so it is possible that we're not capturing this phenomenon at its best. If you want to know more, I suggest and I invite you to follow us on Twitter and to follow us on our Facebook page, but first of all, to go and check out our website, and in particular, take the survey if you find yourself in this, among the people that can be tested with this first tool, but please share the survey. We all know somebody that may fall into this, into the category of the participants that we're looking at right now for this first survey and first tool that the GCCR is offering. And we want to, we can help us by contributing, like building our participants base so that we can provide a better result down the road. So thank you so much for your attention, and Katie, I'll give you the word again.
Thank you, Dr. Parma. So the next part of the panel today is actually to ask a few questions of multiple panelists who are on. So for Dr. Reed, Dr. Dalton, Dr. Mainland, and Dr. Parma, if you guys would unmute yourselves, unmute your video so that you're available. This question was prepared for you all. So what information will be collected that would help people worldwide who have smell loss, even those who have pre-pandemic smell loss? And I'm referring specifically to the GCCR's creation.
One of the key things that we're hoping to learn from these data are the extent to which the viral illnesses actually compromise the olfactory receptor neurons. And so one of the things that we're already learning with the GCCR is that we seem to be having not only, as Valentina said, not only loss with the olfactory receptor neurons in the olfactory system, but also in taste and kinesthesis. So this points to a general a mechanism where neurons are particularly vulnerable to the effects of this particular type of virus. And so this would be very helpful to understand at a mechanistic level exactly what's happening. And that is one of the ways that we can learn, we can find more information about therapeutics. So really the main point is the more we understand about the detail of actually what happens when people lose their sense of smell, everyone benefits because we have a better understanding of the biology of the system.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reed. And Jenifer?
Hi, everyone. So I know that we are going over time, but there are several additional questions. And so for those of you that need to leave, we understand. For those of you who can stay, I'm going to ask a few additional questions, and then we're going to open the panel up to more patient-focused Q&A with Chrissi Kelly, where patients can ask their specific questions. So a couple of things, and anyone can jump in and answer this. But how can people, and this question was asked by a graduate student, gain access to the GCCR data?
The first step is to become a member of the GCCR. So we have a code of conduct and an agreement, and that's what we ask people who wish to participate to sign the code of conduct, which touches on the idea of open data and transparency, diversity, and inclusivity. So that's the first step, is to become a member. And anybody willing to sign the agreement is allowed to be a member. So the next thing to do is we're going to be having a series of steps that people will do to request access to data. They'll need to pre-register their ideas and hypotheses. This is the highest standard of a current scientific conduct, so that we need to declare our hypotheses in advance so we don't go fishing for data. We need to pre-register, and then there'll be a brief approval process by members of the study team for methodological soundness and whether the questions are consistent with our mission. And with those steps, then data can be accessed and analyzed. However, I would point out that once data are published, that data, those data automatically become open to everybody in our open science pillar of responsibility. So those data are going to be automatically available to everyone once we're published, regardless of GCC affiliation.
Okay, and this is a question for Joel Mainland. What is considered a clinically relevant improvement in the olfactory function? This is regarding the white paper.
Yeah, I think there are there are a number of different tests that allow you to test your sense of smell objectively and compare it to norms. And each of those tests has a different norm population that you can compare it to. But there is no universal standard that clinicians use to define that.
Okay, and is Pam Dalton still on the line, Dr. Dalton?
Yes, I'm here.
So we have, oh great, there you are. So here's a question that you might be able to ask. And the question is whether memory is affected by smell loss, or what the relationship is between memory and smell.
Well, it's interesting because it seems that even when people have lost their ability to perceive smells in real time, they can still conjure up some of the memories of smell and the cues that cue them into those smells. But it is something that when it remains so far in the past, the ability to do that obviously diminishes over time, as most memories do fade with time. So unfortunately, I think there is this tight connection in real time, and we just don't know how that is affected by the loss of the constant stimulation of the olfactory system in the current time to be able to continue to keep those memories revived.
Thank you. For Dr. Parma, is there a possibility that you see that COVID could address help address some of the policy issues with creating insurance codes for sensory testing?
Well, definitely, as we have mentioned, like the word anosmia now has become like a word that is in the common language, and people are more knowledgeable than before about this. I'm sure that this research endeavors that we're trying to push forward also with the GCCR are going to try to build the knowledge that it's needed to support that type of information and pass that information along to policymakers and to insurance companies so that they can measure and then quantify the loss that we can have. So hopefully, yes.
Okay, and one general question for anyone: which viruses cause smell loss?
There's been one or two studies about that that have been very incomplete. And so in these very small studies, it seems like many of the common cold viruses do cause smell loss, but this would be a terrific study to try to crowdsource and to really understand. And it really just involves collecting, just to be blunt, snot of people that have colds and smell loss, and really understanding. It's a first step toward understanding what the molecular mechanisms of this post-olfactory loss is about. It's a great study, but more needs to be done.
Right, just to piggyback on that with Danny, most of the time when we have upper respiratory viruses, we experience congestion, and we assume that our loss of smell is due to a conductive loss. That may not be true. That may just be, contemporaneous with something that is actually happening at the sensory neural level with the olfactory receptors. And so I think this is an obvious opportunity because this virus does not produce congestion, but it produces smell loss, for us to recognize that this might be an underlying mechanism for all upper respiratory viral infections.
Chrissi, this is a question for you, but it relates to what Dr. Reed said. Someone wanted to know what kind of research Absent has been involved with. It sort of connects the dots between Christine Broderick's talk and Dr. Reed's comment.
Right. Absent, we have our own questionnaire called the Sense of Smell Project, which was trundling along very nicely before COVID-19 happened. So I'm doing that. I devised a questionnaire with Thomas Hummel and with Bob Pellegrino of the University of Tennessee. And we were asking a lot of questions about qualitative changes to smell loss, which is a particular interest of mine because I have parosmia. So that's one bit of research that we're doing. But the one that is potentially most interesting is my research with the University of Reading in the person of Dr. Jane Parker and research assistant Aidan Kirkwood. And we are looking at the molecular basis for parosmia. We've been doing that since last September, and we have some very interesting preliminary results, which unfortunately have come to a halt now because of COVID-19. But that is something that is really interesting, and we are right now sort of thinking about who else we might want to work with on that, and get the best kind of results from what we're doing. So yes, very, very promising, very promising.
Dr. Parma, this is perhaps for you, but anyone can address this, and that is whether we will eventually understand any difference between patients, COVID patients who experience smell loss and those who don't.
So yes, that's going to be part of one of the scope of the GCCR. We have some initial evidence from a paper that was published today from University of San Diego showing that it seems that people who have smell loss tend to have a milder form of COVID-19. This is just one report. So we will try to understand a little bit better how the smell loss and the degrees of smell loss that we can see in the respondents of the GCCR survey are related to the reporting of other symptoms of COVID-19 and of other respiratory disorders to have a better insight on the pattern of the disease, including smell loss and smell changes in general.
We had another question, which is there any information on people with pre-pandemic smell loss getting COVID-19?
Sorry, we do not have data as of now, but our questionnaire is devised, and the next tool that we're gonna present to the public is devised to understand before and during aspects of the disease, as well as what happens after the symptoms have fade away. And so we may be able in the future to answer this question and try to include among our control groups in the analysis that we're performing also people that have lost their sense of smell before that. But I do not know of any specific difference in rates at the moment, but maybe somebody else does.
And one last question from the audience will there eventually be any information about whether the patients the COVID patients who experience smell loss will have different outcomes, health outcomes?
We wish we knew at this point. I think that's the honest answer. We'll do our best to track and to quantify that. As Joel has mentioned, it's one thing that is still, this is our effort. We're trying to quantify as best we can. This is a novel virus, so it's hard to have responses like as early into the process, but we'll provide the best answers we can based on the data we collect. So unfortunately, we do not have an answer at this point.
Okay, and I will just ask one last question, and this is for Joel Mainland, I think primarily. Has stem cell research been attempted on anosmics who are anosmic from a traumatic brain injury?
No, so there have been animal studies using these types of techniques, but there have been no, we're not yet in the realm where we can start to do this on humans.
Okay, so we're at just about 2:50, and so we went a little bit over, and I asked, and I think Katie asked in the chat room for people with very specific questions for Chrissi and really for Katie to answer, to stay on the line to do that. Those questions, that Q&A is not going to be recorded. So as the rest of the panel discussion has been recorded. So I want to thank everyone again for being here. It was really terrific to have so many people. Katie, anything else you'd like to add?
Just to say thanks to the panelists, thanks to the audience, and as Jenifer said, please note that this panel has been recorded and it will be sent out to you within a few weeks. Anyone who's interested can stay on the line to have specific questions answered by Chrissi Kelly, and I'll hang out as well.
Thank you very much, everyone, and panelists. And if the other panelists are not staying for this last part, you can leave the meeting, and we really appreciate it today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.